But let me just say this. Thousands of years ago in a small religious town, if you were young, you were also chaste. Right? It's not like Old Town. Anyways, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. Well, what's Emmanuel mean?
As it turns out, Mark Driscoll is a very well-known pastor out of Arizona, and he wants Jewish people to know why they should worship Jesus. And he provides a series of reasons, and I thought, well, maybe this is a good idea to explore the evidence.
And what I'm excited to do today is to answer the question, how did people know that Jesus was coming? We'll jump right in, we'll move pretty quick. 4000 BC, before Christ, Adam and Eve received the prophecy that the Messiah, Jesus, would be born of a woman. So here's the promise in Genesis 3:15. God shows up and says to Satan, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. As soon as sin comes into human history, what's really interesting is God says, I'm sending my son, I'm sending a male child into human history. He's going to overturn the curse, he's going to forgive sin, and he is going to defeat this diabolical dragon who is Satan himself.
This is probably the most compelling reason why someone should convert to Christianity. And here it goes. It says in Genesis, roughly 4000 BCE, Pastor Driscoll insists that the Messiah would be sent into the world and he would be the son of a woman and he would defeat Satan. That's what we're told. As it turns out, if you go to the book of Genesis, he's referring to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. I am sure, if you were just watching this guy on YouTube, you'd go, how would he say that with so much confidence? Surely it says that somewhere in the Torah. Look it up for yourself. It isn't there. The text is in the context of God cursing the Adam, Eve, and the serpent. And there, God says that I place enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Your seed will crush your seed will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent can bite the heel. As it turns out, there's nothing here about a Messiah. There's no mention that the Messiah would defeat the devil. And if I conceded all this, and this would be just another reason why Jesus couldn't be the Messiah, let me explain. That means if the role of the Messiah is to destroy Satan, let's just concede everything because I want to steel man this. If the role of Mashiach is to destroy the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination in the world, is to destroy the devil, which is, right? Well, how did Jesus do with that? And the answer is, as far as I can tell, Satan is doing better than ever. So he didn't accomplish that either, which means this is just one more thing that Jesus didn't accomplish. The text actually says that I'll put hatred between you and the woman, because after all, it was the serpent that sought to seduce the woman. So the retribution is that, in fact, there'll always be enmity. The descendants of the woman, meaning mankind. In fact, we're told shortly after that the woman would be called Chava because she's the mother of mankind, that mankind would have a natural aversion to the serpent, and man has the ability, her descendants have the ability to destroy Satan. Conversely, Satan could only bite at the heel, which means that man has the ability to deliver a a fatal blow to Satan. He can overcome him. Now, in case you wonder, like, where am I getting that from? How do I know that's what comes into view in this early part of Genesis? Is because the very next chapter we're told that, in fact, sin is hiding behind the door. In a conversation between God and Cain, we are told in chapter 4, verse 6 and 7, that sin is hiding behind the door. You are the desire, you are his desire, but you can master over him. It's right there in the text. Incidentally, in Christian theology, man cannot overcome Satan. Man cannot overcome sin. There's nothing man can do to earn his way to heaven. That's the kind of language you'd hear in church. There's nothing man can do to achieve his own salvation. That's what the whole book of Romans is about. That's especially the case in Romans chapter 3 through 6. That's the whole point. Now, there are some Christians who would insist that because it says in Hebrew, ve'evo oshes beincho uvein isha uvein zaracho uvein zarah, between your seed and her seed. So some Christians argue that because a woman doesn't have seed, only a man has seed, meaning sperm, a woman has an ovum, so therefore this must be a reference, a clear reference of the virgin birth. This is complete nonsense. Now, it is true that the word zera, seed, can mean just that, can mean that which a man produces in order to have children. But it also can mean descendants. It doesn't mean only that. And this is a fallacy, a linguistic fallacy. So as an example, in Genesis chapter 16, verse 10, when the angel is speaking to Hagar, he promises her, same word, that from her seed will come a great nation. In that case, it's talking about Ishmael. So that's clearly not true. So just be very aware of that, where you have this etymological fallacy where you constrict the word zera or zara to only one possible meaning, that is like sperm in Greek. So therefore a woman doesn't have that. Therefore it must be a unambiguous reference to a virgin birth. Don't buy that. That's just a game. That's just a bait and switch. So there's nothing in the text. And I just, encourage you to listen to the way Mark presents that. He presents us with absolute confidence that, of course, it says that the woman is going to, give birth to the Messiah, and the Messiah is going to defeat the devil. You notice how he says that with that much confidence, to the point that I have no doubt that people sitting in that church listening to this sermon and why the Jews have to worship Jesus, that they're utterly convinced that there is such a verse like that. As it turns out, this claim is completely vacuous. It's made up.
700 years before Christ, Isaiah prophesies that Jesus' mother would be a virgin who conceived by a miracle, and that Jesus would be God who became a man. You guys see this every year on your Christmas card. This one shows up every year. Isaiah 7:14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin. And there's a debate regarding whether this means a woman who is young versus a woman who is chaste. I get into all of it in the book. But let me just say this. Thousands of years ago in a small religious town, if you were young, you were also chaste. Right? It's not like Old Town. Anyways, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. Well, what's Emmanuel mean? God with us. So the virgin, miraculous supernatural birth, will give birth to a son. That son will not just be her son, but God's son, Emmanuel, God with us. Well, of course, this is all fulfilled through his mother Mary, bringing Jesus into the world.
So this is an indictment against not Mark Driscoll, but against Matthew, the author of the first gospel, chapter 1, verse 23. The verse is mistranslated, taken out of context. In fact, not only does the word virgin not appear there, but the definite article is there. Matthew would have us believe there's no definite article there, and the context has nothing to do with the birth of the Messiah. The word in Hebrew, the text says, Hine ho alma hara v'yiledas bein. Behold, the young woman is with a child, and she will give birth to a son. V'karash shemo Emmanuel, and she will call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us. So it's not that in the ancient world he said that, well, young women would typically, he said chase, we'll just use conventional language. Young women in the ancient world, in ancient Israel, were certainly chaste, meaning a virgin. Well, there's nothing could be sillier. As it turns out, in the ancient world, Jewish young women got married and had babies. In fact, it's old women that don't have babies. Young women do, right? If Isaiah wanted to convey that a virgin is to conceive, there's a word that means virgin in both biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew, and that's the word basula. Matthew quite deliberately altered that word in order to make it appear Christological. It doesn't say basula in Isaiah 7:14. Incidentally, the word betula or basula, that word appears many times in the Hebrew Bible. Isaiah uses that term many times. If he wanted to speak about virginity, he would have said that. Now, you might say, well, virginity, young woman, there's some sort of relationship. He tried to convey that with a sort of some humor there, but it really is very silly. A young woman conveys two things, youth and gender, nothing else. Whereas a virgin conveys only a sexual history, so they're not related to each other. The context of Isaiah 7:14 is a sign when the Ephro-Syria war would come to an end, and the king of Samaria, meaning the northern kingdom, his name is Pekach ben Ramalyahu, who formed an alliance with Ritzin, who was the king of Syria, to destroy Achaz, the southern kingdom, when they would fail. Isaiah is speaking about an immediate event, and the sign is the maturity of the child. I encourage people to read Isaiah 7, but start with verse 1. Now, this is never going to happen in church. Never. It means you're never going to sit in a pew and hear a pastor read off Isaiah 7 from verse 1 at least to verse 16. That cannot happen. The reason is that everyone would immediately know, become transparent, that this passage has nothing to do with the birth of the Messiah, but rather when the two kings, the Pekach ben Ramalyahu and Ritzin, would be defeated. The sign is in verse 15 and 16. Butter and honey will the child eat when he knows to reject bad and choose good, for before the child knows to reject evil and choose good, these two kings who threaten you, they'll be destroyed. The child's name is Emmanuel, which conveys that God is with us, meaning that God will protect the southern kingdom of Judah, which was under threat. This is the name the mother was supposed to give the child. In contrast, you have in Isaiah 8, Isaiah, who's the husband, this is Isaiah's wife. Isaiah is told to name the child Maher Shalal Hashbaz, quicken, loot, hasten the booty. And you know it's the same child because before the child knows to say daddy or mommy, see Isaiah 8, verse 3 and 4, these two kings. Which two kings? The king of Samaria, meaning the northern kingdom of Israel, and Syria. Now, if this is referring to Jesus, I'd like to know when did the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Syria go to war against Judea in the time of Jesus? This is nonsensical. In fact, the northern kingdom of Israel did not exist during the time of Jesus in the first century. The kingdom of Syria did not exist during the first century, during the time of Jesus. During the first century, both Syria and the land of Israel were part of the Roman Empire. This is what these Christians, you ask me, why do I care about Christians? People always ask me, why do I do this? Because I care. Christians are persuaded by this. As it turns out, Isaiah tells us that God gave him children for what reason? As signs and portents to Israel. Isaiah 8, verse 18, explicitly says that. So the names of Isaiah's children are signs for in this case, the kingdom of Judah, that they will be rescued. And again, the sign is not the conception of the child or the birth of the child, but look carefully, it's the sign is the immediacy, that the child won't even be mature enough to reject bad and choose good. The child won't even be able to say daddy or mommy when these two kings would be destroyed. Now, as it turns out, both Pekach ben Ramalyahu and Ritzin, the king of Israel, the northern king of Israel, and the king of Syria were both assassinated. So that's the immediacy. So what this does, Isaiah 7:14, it's used by Matthew, is an indictment against the Christian Bible. And do not let anyone fool you into believing that Matthew was relying on the Septuagint. You're going to hear that repeatedly from missionaries, okay? Matthew was relying on the Septuagint. There is nowhere in the Christian Bible where the Septuagint is even mentioned. There is no Septuagint in our hands from the Christian era or before. That means that is more than 2,000 years old, with Isaiah 7:14, with the Greek word parthenos in it. The Septuagint had been worked on by many people. That means the original Septuagint, going back to roughly 256 BCE, that was penned for the Library of Alexandria by some 70, 72 translators, was only the 5 books of Moses. You have to get this into your head, okay? The original Septuagint, which was assembled, which was translated from Hebrew to Greek, was only of the Pentateuch, only the Torah, nothing else. Now, listen very carefully. Subsequently, translating the Hebrew Bible into the Greek language became a cottage industry. There would be many Jews who would do that, all of Tanakh. Okay, we have fragments of that in the Dead Sea Scrolls of Greek translations, and this would continue into the 2nd century and 3rd century. And it was the church, I'll call him a church father, the church theologian. He was really a bright guy, no question, probably the most prolific author in the Christian world. His name is Origen. He's the one that assembles the Septuagint as we have it today. Now, they keep calling it Septuagint, but it's not the original Septuagint. So the Septuagint we have, if you went on Amazon or went online and found the Septuagint, that is a Christian product. So be very careful. The original Septuagint, that's roughly 2,200 years old, does not exist because the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, not once, but many times over. The original Septuagint is lost. I demonstrate in Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical that, in fact, even of the 5 books of Moses, it's heavily edited later on, subsequently. I show that by using the Talmud, but that's not germane here. So don't fall for the Septuagint excuse. It's not going to get them off the hook. Christians insist that there are hundreds of prophecies that can be illustrated from your Hebrew Bible that Jesus is the Messiah. When we examine all these putative prophecies, what we discover is that they're all scandalous, they're all promiscuous, they're all filled with basically a smoke and mirrors. It's just sleight of hand. And therefore, 365 times 0 equals 0. There are no prophecies in the Hebrew Bible that speak about Jesus or Christianity. These are all invented by the church. Matthew indulges in this kind of this kind of chicanery using a passage in the Hebrew Bible more frequently than almost any other author in the New Testament. The only exception to that is Paul. So both Paul and Matthew are engaging in altering the Hebrew Bible in order to make it appear Christological. It's not that the Jewish scriptures are never supposedly quoted by other authors in the Christian Bible, but it's much more rare. It can be said, therefore, that Matthew was more responsible than anyone else. Now, when I say Matthew, we don't know who wrote the first gospel. We're just using the word Matthew in quotation marks. But whoever wrote the first gospel was more responsible for the rejection of Christianity among the Jews than anyone else, because if Matthew had never been written, many more people would have stumbled into the church.
Furthermore, 700 BC, Micah prophesies that Jesus would be born in the town of Bethlehem. So Micah 5:2, but you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, that's the region, Bethlehem is the city, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah. From you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler or king in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days. The original word there is from eternity. And it's saying that someone is coming from eternity and he's entering into human history, and he's going to come to a town called Bethlehem, which is a very small, obscure, insignificant town. And we know from the story of Scripture that Mary and Joseph, they were part of the family line of David. So Joseph adopted Jesus, and he ultimately married Mary. And so what happened was the Roman government wanted to make sure they're getting all their taxes. And so they call a census, and everybody's got to go to their hometown to register. Well, Joseph, in God's providence, he's from the family line of David. The home of David is Bethlehem. So Joseph and Mary, though she's very pregnant, they have to make the journey to Bethlehem. And in the providence of God, they happen to arrive there at the very time that Jesus was born, so that the prophecy would be fulfilled that he would be born in Bethlehem, because he didn't live in Bethlehem. He just visited there for a government census.
Yeah. So what he's delivering here is Luke's version of Jesus' infancy narrative. Matthew's version contradicts it completely, but I'm going to set that aside for right now. What is key is that Micah chapter 5, verse 2 in a Christian Bible, it's verse 1 in a Hebrew Bible, so it's the same verse, it's just the chapter break is different, is completely misquoted. So the text tells us, in fact, that a ruler will come from Beis Lechem. So if you just read the first part of the verse without the end of Micah 5:1 or 5:2, you might think that the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem. First of all, the word Mashiach isn't there, but it does say a ruler. But the key is the very end of the text. It says, U'moitzosav mikedem mimei olam, and his origins are from mikedem, which means from earlier times, mimei olam, from ancient days or from earlier days or days of old, okay? Which means that ending indicates that the Messiah is not supposed to be born in Bethlehem, but rather his connection to Beis Lechem, his connection to this city is from earlier times, in that King David was born in Beis Lechem. See 1 Samuel chapter 17. So it is true, King David was born in Bethlehem, and that's why Matthew and Luke are going to work very hard to have Jesus born in Bethlehem. However, they are going to independently use two completely different plot devices to make that happen. You've heard Mark talk about the family originally is from Nazareth, and they have to get down to Bethlehem because of a census, which is silly. No one, when there's a census taken, people don't go back to the place where their family lived 1,000 years earlier. Like, where would you go? Matthew has it completely the reverse. Matthew has the family originally from Bethlehem, and then they go down to Egypt because Herod the Great is looking to kill the kid. And then when they think about going back home, they're told, you better go to Nazareth because Herod Archelaus is now the ruler over Judea, and it would be very dangerous to go back to Bethlehem. I want to set that aside. Mikeda mimei olam, the word mimei olam, that phrase, which means days of. Now, the word olam alone, if you take that word alone, and there's no modifier, it can mean eternity, like liolam va'ed. It can mean eternity. But now when it's mimei olam, it means, because it means from days of old. In fact, that phrase, mimei olam or kimei olam, appears more than once in Tanakh. For example, just two chapters later, in Micah chapter 7, verse 14, we have the exact same phrase. And there in Micah 7:14, in every Christian Bible, it then states correctly that it's from ancient times. The phrase in context is that we're hoping for the latter times when it'll be like the good old days. What Mark is doing here is altering it and saying eternity in order to convey that Jesus is God somehow. Now, Matthew, whoever wrote the book of Matthew, is much more advanced than this pastor in that, and you won't even believe me unless you look it up. And what I'd encourage you to do is open up Micah 5. If using a Christian Bible, it would be Micah 5:2. And then open up to Matthew chapter 2, verse 6. You want to look at those side by side. And you'll notice that Matthew, whoever wrote the first gospel, realized that the very ending of Micah 5:2 presents an existential problem. Because the end of Micah 5:2, that from and is going forth umoitzoisav mikeda mimei olam, means that the relationship between the Messiah and Bethlehem is from the old days. For those of you not familiar with history, Micah lived 2,700 years ago. Micah lived the same time as Isaiah during the Assyrian Empire, okay? So just for one moment, because I realize that many people are just not familiar with the history here. So Micha, that's his real name, lived at the same time as Yeshayahu. He lived the same time as Hosea. He lived at the same time as Amos. They all lived at the exact same time, okay? During the heat of the Assyrian Empire, this is very important, roughly 2,700 years ago, okay? That's when Micha or Micah was written. King David lived 3,000 years ago. King David lived 3,000 years ago, which means that Micah lived 300 years after King David. Do you understand? That's very important to understand. Micah lived 3 centuries after King David. Therefore, when Micah says that the future ruler, his relationship to Bethlehem will be from the old days, he's referring to 300 years ago from the city in which King David was born in. See 1 Samuel chapter 17, 56 through 58. So you understand what's going on there. This is a monumental problem for the author of the first gospel, because the author of the first gospel wants to convince you that it was predicted in the Hebrew Bible, specifically in Micah, that the Messiah will be himself will be born in Bethlehem, rather than the relationship between the Messiah and Bethlehem is ancient days. So he cuts it up. And in fact, he deletes the last part of Micah chapter 5, verse 2/1. If you go to Matthew chapter 2, verse 6, the ending of his origins will be from the earlier times, from ancient days, has disappeared. I'm not kidding, has disappeared. It's gone. Matthew erased it, deleted it, took out a scalpel and just selected in the words from ancient. His origins are from ancient days. He deleted it and he pasted instead, and he will be a shepherd over Israel, which he borrows from the subsequent verse. So what Matthew does, he collapses it. Why? This is not some artistic. He did this specifically to persuade his reader that Bethlehem was the birthplace of Mashiach, of the Messiah, of Jesus. And of course, all you have to do is go back to the original. My brothers and sisters, all you need to do is look it up for yourself. If you go back to the original, go back to Tanakh, go back to the Jewish scriptures, and you're familiar with these sacred oracles that are eternal, no missionary, no matter how talented, will be able to rob you of a relationship with God. Thank you. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ואת נעשה בחפצו כל